She risked everything to help an old man with Alzheimer's get home. The next morning, his son arrived with papers that made her whole body freeze. Maya Johnson's sneakers hit the cracked sidewalk with quick, steady steps as she hurried home from the community center. The November wind cut through her thin jacket, and the setting sun painted long shadows across the suburban streets. Her phone buzzed, another text from her mom about dinner. Coming home soon, she typed with cold fingers, glancing at the time, 5:47 p.m. She'd stayed later than usual at the center, helping Mrs. Parker with her physical therapy exercises. The old woman had been having a rough day, and Maya couldn't bring herself to leave on time. A gust of wind whipped her braids against her face. The temperature was dropping fast. The weather forecast had predicted the first frost of the season tonight. Maya pulled her jacket tighter and picked up her pace. That's when she saw him. An elderly man stood in the middle of the sidewalk about 50 feet ahead, wearing striped pajamas and a thin bathrobe. He turned in slow circles, looking up at the houses with a confused expression. Even from this distance, Maya could see he was shivering. "Hey, are you okay?" she called out, slowing her steps. The man didn't respond. He just kept turning, muttering something she couldn't hear. Maya's heart thumped harder. She should keep walking. She was already late, and her mom would be worried. But the man reminded her so much of her father in his final days. That same lost look, the disorientation. "Sir," she tried again, taking a few careful steps closer. "Do you need help?" He turned toward her voice. His face was weathered but dignified, with a neatly trimmed white beard. His eyes were sharp but unfocused, like he was looking through her rather than at her. "Catherine," he asked. "Catherine, when did you get home?" Maya's stomach dropped. This wasn't good. "No. So my name is Maya. I work at the community center. Are you lost?" "The garden needs weeding," he said, looking past her at nothing. Catherine always kept such a beautiful garden. "Have you seen her?" Maya glanced around the empty street. The houses were all dark. Everyone was inside, avoiding the cold. A movement caught her eye, someone in a suit watching from a parked car. She recognized him, Mr. Thompson, the municipal administrator who'd been trying to shut down the community center. He was taking notes on his phone, probably looking for any excuse to claim the center wasn't properly supervising its elderly visitors. The old man took an unsteady step forward. "Catherine," he called out again, his voice breaking. Maya's phone buzzed. Another text from her mom. "Dinner's getting cold. Where are you?" The old man was only wearing slippers. His feet had to be freezing. Maya thought of her father again, how he'd wander the hospital halls near the end, looking for her mother who'd died years before. The doctors said it was the brain cancer making him confused. She'd always wondered if he'd been scared, if he'd known on some level that he was lost. "Sir," she said gently, moving closer, "it's getting dark. Can I help you get home?" He blinked at her, his expression clearing slightly. "Home?" A tremor ran through him. From cold or fear, she couldn't tell. "Yes, home. Do you have any ID? Maybe something with your address?" He patted his robe pockets with shaking hands. Maya noticed his fingernails were neatly trimmed and clean. Someone was taking care of him. "I had been. I need to feed the cat," he said. "But we don't have a cat anymore, do we?" Catherine would know. Maya's phone buzzed again. She ignored it. The sun was almost gone now, and the temperature was still dropping. She couldn't leave him out here. The man pulled a worn leather wallet from his robe pocket. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped it. Maya caught it before it could fall. "May I?" she asked, holding up the wallet. He nodded vaguely, already looking around for Catherine again. The ID inside read Robert Wilson with an address just a few blocks away. There was a small photo tucked behind the license, the man with a younger version of himself, probably his son. They were smiling at the camera, holding up fish on a dock somewhere. "Mr. Wilson," Maya tried. "I can help you get home. It's not far." He turned toward her voice, but his eyes were distant again. "Catherine always worries when I'm late." Behind them, a car door slammed. Maya glanced back to see Mr. Thompson getting out of his vehicle, cell phone raised like a weapon. "Young lady," he called out, "step away from that man immediately." Maya's heart raced. This looked bad. A teenage girl with a confused elderly man, holding his wallet. But she couldn't just leave him. "He's lost," she called back. "I'm trying to help him get home." "This is exactly the kind of liability I've warned the center about," Mr. Thompson said, walking closer. "You're not qualified to handle this situation. I'm calling the police." Mr. Wilson grabbed Maya's arm suddenly, his grip surprisingly strong. "We need to go," he said urgently. "They're coming to take me away. They always come at night." Maya looked between Mr. Wilson's frightened face and Mr. Thompson's stern one. She thought of her father again. How scared he'd been of hospitals near the end. How he'd begged not to be left alone. The choice crystallized in her mind. She couldn't leave him. "Mr. Wilson," she said quietly, "let's get you home before it gets any colder. Your address is just a few blocks away." "Young lady, do not move," Mr. Thompson warned, phone to his ear. "I'm reporting this." But Maya was already gently guiding Mr. Wilson forward, her arm linked with his. "It's okay," she told him. "I'll help you find Catherine." He seemed to accept this, falling into step beside her. His slippers scraped against the sidewalk. Behind them, Mr. Thompson's voice rose. "Yes, police? I'd like to report a suspicious incident." Maya walked faster, her heart pounding. She'd probably just ruined everything. Her volunteer position, her college recommendations, maybe even risked arrest. But Mr. Wilson's arm was ice-cold against hers, and he was still shivering. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She'd have to explain everything to her mom later. Right now, she just needed to get Mr. Wilson home safely. "Catherine used to love walking in the evening," he said softly as they turned the corner. "Even when it was cold." "Tell me more about Catherine," Maya said, trying to keep him focused as they walked. Her own fingers were numb now, but she could see the street sign for his address up ahead. Mr. Wilson's voice grew dreamy. "She had the most beautiful smile. She'd light up the whole room. But she's been gone so long now." Maya squeezed his arm gently. "I'm sorry," she said. And she was sorry for his loss, sorry for his confusion, sorry that the world could be so cruel to people who deserved better. They walked on through the gathering dark, while behind them, Mr. Thompson's voice faded into the cold night air. Maya didn't know what would happen when they reached Mr. Wilson's house, or what consequences she'd face tomorrow. But for now, she just concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other, keeping them both steady as they made their way home. The street lights flickered on above them, casting pools of yellow light on the empty sidewalk. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Maya walked a little faster, guiding Mr. Wilson's uncertain steps. Whatever happened next, she knew she'd made the right choice. Some things were more important than rules. Her phone buzzed one final time in her pocket, but she didn't check it. The night was only beginning, and there was still a long way to go. "This is it," Maya said, checking the address on Mr. Wilson's ID against the house number. 1247, Maple Street. The house sat dark and silent, a two-story colonial with peeling white paint and untrimmed bushes crowding the front windows. Dead leaves skittered across the porch in the wind. Mr. Wilson stared at the building, his forehead creased. "No," he said firmly. "This isn't right." Maya's fingers were completely numb now. "The address matches your ID, Mr. Wilson. See?" She held up his license, but he waved it away. "Catherine wouldn't let the garden get like this," he insisted. "Our roses won first prize at the garden show last summer." Maya glanced at the overgrown yard. The only roses were withered brown stalks poking through the weeds. "Maybe we can clean it up tomorrow," she said. "But right now we need to get inside where it's warm." She led him up the cracked front walk. His slippers whispered against the concrete, and he leaned heavily on her arm. At the front door, Maya hesitated. "Do you have your keys, Mr. Wilson?" He patted his robe pockets again, muttering under his breath. Maya spotted a key ring hanging from a nail beside the door, the kind of thing someone might put there for a person who often forgot their keys. "Here we go," she said, reaching for them. But as she touched the key ring, Mr. Wilson suddenly pulled away from her. "Thieves!" he shouted, stumbling backward. "Catherine, call the police." "No, Mr. Wilson, it's okay." Maya held up her hands. "I'm just trying to help you get inside." But he was already halfway down the walk, moving with surprising speed for someone who'd been so unsteady moments before. Maya hurried after him. "Get away," he yelled. "Help! Someone help!" Lights flicked on in the house next door. A face appeared at the window, a middle-aged woman with curlers in her hair. She squinted out at them suspiciously. Maya caught up to Mr. Wilson at the sidewalk. "Please," she said quietly, "you'll freeze out here. Let me help you." He turned in a circle, his breathing rapid and shallow. "Catherine," he called. "Where are you?" The neighbor's front door opened. "Everything okay out there?" The woman called sharply. Before Maya could respond, a police cruiser turned onto the street, lights flashing but sirens silent. Maya's stomach clenched. Mr. Thompson must have called them after all. The patrol car pulled up to the curb. Two officers got out, hands resting casually on their belts. "Good evening," the taller officer said. "We got a report about a suspicious person with an elderly man." The neighbor hurried down her front walk in a flowered bathrobe. "I was just about to call you myself. This girl was trying to break into Robert's house." "No, I wasn't," Maya protested. "I'm trying to help him get home." He was wandering outside in his pajamas. Mr. Wilson had gone very still, staring at the police lights. His face was pale in the red and blue glow. The shorter officer approached him. "Sir, are you all right?" "He has Alzheimer's," Maya explained quickly. "He's confused. I found his ID. He lives right there." She pointed to the house. "And who are you?" the taller officer asked. "Maya Johnson. I volunteer at the Riverside Community Center. We help elderly residents there. At this hour? I was walking home when I found him. I couldn't just leave him out in the cold." The neighbor scoffed. "The community center. That place is nothing but trouble. They let anyone volunteer there." Maya felt her face grow hot, but she kept her voice steady. "I've worked there for 2 years. I can show you my ID badge." She reached for her backpack, moving slowly. The officers watched as she pulled out her volunteer ID. The taller officer examined it under his flashlight. Mr. Wilson suddenly spoke up. "I need to get home. Catherine will be worried." The shorter officer's face softened. "Sir, is Catherine your wife?" Yes. She'll be looking for me." The officers exchanged a glance. The neighbor cleared her throat. "Catherine passed away 3 years ago," she said quietly. "I've lived next door to Robert for 20 years. His son James comes by sometimes. But," she shrugged, "not often enough, if you ask me." Maya's heart ached. 3 years, just like her dad. She wondered if the pain ever really went away, or if it just turned into something else, like confusion or forgetting. The taller officer handed Maya's ID back. "Why don't we all go up to the house together? Make sure everything's okay." Maya nodded gratefully. Mr. Wilson seemed calmer with the officers present, though he kept looking around for Catherine. Back at the front door, the neighbor pointed out a hidden key under a fake rock in the garden. Inside, the house was cold and musty. Maya found a light switch, revealing a tidy living room with old-fashioned furniture and dozens of framed photos on the walls. "Catherine," Mr. Wilson called hopefully. "How about we get you settled in your chair?" "Robert," the neighbor suggested. "I'll make some tea." She seemed to know her way around the kitchen, pulling out mugs and filling a kettle. The officers did a quick walkthrough of the house while Maya helped Mr. Wilson to a worn armchair. "This is my chair," he said, sounding surprised. "I remember this chair." "Yes, sir," Maya said softly. "You're home now." The shorter officer came back downstairs. "House is secure. No signs of forced entry or anything suspicious." He looked at Maya. "You did the right thing, getting him home. But next time, call us first. These situations can be unpredictable." Maya nodded, though she knew she'd do the same thing again if she had to. The neighbor, who introduced herself as Mrs. Martinez, brought out cups of tea. "I tried to check on him," she told the officers. "But I work nights most days. His son James has power of attorney, but he lives 2 hours away." "Does Mr. Wilson have any in-home care?" the taller officer asked. Mrs. Martinez shook her head. "James keeps talking about a nursing home, but nothing's happened yet." Mr. Wilson had dozed off in his chair, the tea cooling untouched beside him. In sleep, the confusion smoothed from his face. He looked peaceful. Maya's phone buzzed, another text from her mom. She winced when she saw the time, 7:23 p.m. "I should go," she said, standing. "My mom's waiting dinner." "We can give you a ride," the shorter officer offered. Maya hesitated, but nodded. It would be faster than walking, and she had a lot of explaining to do at home. Mrs. Martinez promised to stay with Mr. Wilson until he was settled for the night. As Maya followed the officers out, she glanced back one last time. Mr. Wilson slept on in his chair, one hand resting on the empty seat beside him, where Catherine used to sit, maybe. Maya hoped he was having good dreams in the patrol car, Maya gave her address and then sat quietly in the back, watching the familiar streets pass by. Her mom was going to be furious. But looking at the Wilson house disappearing behind them, Maya couldn't regret her choice. The car's radio crackled with dispatcher codes and siren whoops from other units. Maya thought about Mr. Wilson calling for his wife, about her dad in his hospital bed asking for her mom. Some losses went deeper than memory, maybe. Some love stayed even when everything else faded away. The patrol car turned onto her street. Maya took a deep breath, preparing herself for what was coming. The porch light was on at her house, and she could see her mom's shadow moving behind the curtains. "Thank you for the ride," she said as they pulled up. "You've got a good heart, kid," the shorter officer said. "Just be careful out there." Maya nodded and got out, squaring her shoulders as she walked to her front door. Behind her, the patrol car idled at the curb, waiting to make sure she got inside safely. Her mom opened the door before she could reach for her keys. "Maya Johnson, where on earth have you been?" "I've been worried sick." Maya stepped into the warm house, the familiar sense of home wrapping around her. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something." The patrol car pulled away, lights off now. Somewhere across town, Mr. Wilson slept in his chair while Mrs. Martinez kept watch. And Maya began the long process of explaining why some rules had to be broken, why some people couldn't be left alone in the cold. Maya sat at the kitchen table, her untouched dinner cold in front of her. Her mom paced the small kitchen, still in her nurse's scrubs from her hospital shift. "I can't believe you missed our dinner," her mom said, running a hand through her short curls. "You know how important these family dinners are." "I couldn't just leave him out there," Maya replied, pushing her peas around with her fork. "He was freezing." "Mom?" Her mom stopped pacing. "You could have called the police first." "Called me." "Called anyone." "Do you know how dangerous that could have been?" He reminded me of Dad. The words hung in the air between them. Her mom's face softened slightly, then hardened again. "That's exactly what worries me," she said. "Maya, I know you miss him. I miss him too. But you can't save everyone." Maya's phone buzzed on the table. A text from the community center. "Emergency meeting tomorrow morning regarding tonight's incident. Attendance mandatory." Her stomach dropped. "Mr. Thompson reported me to the center." Her mom leaned against the counter. "The administrator who's been trying to shut it down?" "Maya, I know. But Mom, if you'd seen Mr. Wilson out there." Maya pushed her plate away. "He kept calling for his wife. Like how Dad used to call for." "Don't." Her mom held up a hand. "Just don't." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, a car alarm went off somewhere in the distance. Maya's phone buzzed again. This time it was Mrs. Martinez. "Robert's asking for you." He's agitated. "Can you come over?" "No," her mom said, reading the text over Maya's shoulder. "Absolutely not." "Mom, please, it's almost 9 p.m. You have school tomorrow." Maya stood up. "I'll just go check on him quickly. Mrs. Martinez has to leave for her night shift soon." "Maya Johnson, sit down." Her mom's voice cracked like a whip. "You are not going anywhere tonight. Someone needs to help him, and that someone doesn't have to be you." Her mom braced both hands on the table. "You're 16, Maya. You're not a nurse, or a caregiver, or a social worker. You're a kid who should be focusing on school and friends, and I'm not a kid. And I know more about taking care of people than you think. Who was here with Dad when you had to work double shifts? Who helped him remember to take his meds and made sure he ate? And stop." Her mom's eyes filled with tears. "Just stop." Maya's phone buzzed a third time. "Mrs. Martinez again. Never mind. His son James is on his way. Should be here in 2 hours." Maya showed the text to her mom. "See? I just want to go help until his son gets there." Her mom read the message, then looked at Maya for a long moment. "You're not going to let this go, are you? Would you? If it was one of your patients?" Her mom sighed deeply. "That's different. I'm trained for what? For caring about people? For not wanting them to be alone when they are scared." Maya's voice caught. "Like Dad was?" The kitchen fell silent again. Her mom sat down heavily in the chair across from Maya. "You know I didn't have a choice," she said quietly. "After your father got sick, those hospital bills." "I know, Mom. I'm not blaming you. I just—" Maya wiped her eyes. "I need to do this. Please understand." Her mom reached across the table and took Maya's hand. "You have so much of him in you. That same big heart." She squeezed Maya's fingers. but he wouldn't want you putting yourself at risk. I'll be careful. Mrs. Martinez will be there until James arrives. And I'll come straight home after. Her mom was quiet for a long moment. Then, 1 hour. That's it. And you text me every 15 minutes. Maya jumped up and hugged her mom tight. Thank you. I'll be back soon. I promise. Maya. Her mom's voice stopped her at the door. Remember what happened with your father. Sometimes no matter how much you care, no matter how hard you try. I know, Mom. Maya pulled on her jacket. But sometimes trying is all we can do. The walk back to Mr. Wilson's house seemed shorter this time. The night had grown colder, and frost crystallized on the grass. Maya's breath came out in white puffs. Mrs. Martinez answered the door before Maya could knock. Thank goodness you're here. He's been asking for Catherine non-stop. Maya followed her into the living room. Mr. Wilson was still in his chair, but now he was leaning forward, agitated. Catherine, he called out when Maya entered. Then his face fell. No, you're not her. But I know you. I'm Maya, Mr. Wilson. From earlier tonight. Maya, he repeated. Yes, you helped me find my way home. Mrs. Martinez touched Maya's arm. I need to leave for work soon. His son James called. He should be here around 11. Maya nodded. I can stay until then. Mr. Wilson was looking through his wallet again, pulling out old photos. Catherine must be here somewhere, he muttered. Maya sat in the chair next to him. Can I see those pictures? He handed them over carefully. The photos were worn at the edges, well handled. Maya recognized a younger Mr. Wilson in many of them, standing next to a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, Catherine. In others, she saw the son from the fishing photo, growing from a boy to a teenager to a man. That's James, Mr. Wilson said, pointing to one photo. His voice was suddenly clear. My son. He doesn't visit much anymore. Maya looked up, surprised by his lucidity. He's coming tonight, she said gently. Mr. Wilson's face clouded again. Is he? Catherine would know. He shuffled through more photos. Where is she? She always knows these things. Maya's phone buzzed, the 50-minute check-in with her mom. As she typed a quick, all okay, she noticed Mr. Thompson had emailed the community center's entire volunteer list about tomorrow's meeting. Mrs. Martinez came back in, now dressed in her waitress uniform. I got to go. Will you be all right here? Maya nodded. We'll be fine. I'll stay until James arrives. After Mrs. Martinez left, Maya helped Mr. Wilson organize his photos. He had dozens of them, family vacations, graduations, holidays. In each one, Catherine's smile lit up the frame. She loved Christmas best, Mr. Wilson said, touching one photo of Catherine decorating a tree. The lights, the carols. He looked up at Maya. Do you know any carols? A few, Maya said. My dad used to sing them, even in the middle of summer. Used to. He passed away 3 years ago. Mr. Wilson was quiet for a moment. Then, with startling clarity, I'm sorry. Losing someone, it leaves a hole that never quite fills in, doesn't it? Maya stared at him. Yes, she whispered. Exactly like that. He nodded slowly. Catherine's been gone 3 years too. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I think she's just in the other room, or out in the garden. His hands trembled as he gathered the photos. But then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again. Maya's eyes burned. My dad was the same way near the end. He'd forget Mom was gone, ask for her over and over. The mind plays tricks, Mr. Wilson said. But the heart remembers. He touched the photo of Catherine at Christmas again. Even when we forget everything else. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, looking through more photos. Maya texted her mom updates. Mr. Wilson drifted in and out of confusion, sometimes calling Maya Catherine, sometimes remembering who she was. Around 10:30, headlights swept across the living room walls. A car door slammed outside. Mr. Wilson straightened in his chair. James? Heavy footsteps crossed the porch. Then a knock at the door. Maya stood to answer it, but Mr. Wilson caught her hand. Don't go, he said. His eyes were clear again, but frightened. Please, I'll be right back, she promised. She opened the door to find a man in his 40s, wearing a rumpled suit and an exhausted expression. He looked just like the man in the fishing photo, only older, grayer. I'm James Wilson, he said. Are you the girl who found my father? Maya nodded. Behind her, she heard Mr. Wilson call out. "James? Is that really you?" James stepped inside, his face tight with emotion. "Yeah, Dad. It's me. I'm here." Maya gathered her things quietly while father and son had their awkward reunion. As she headed for the door, James caught her arm. "Thank you," he said roughly, "for helping him, for staying." Maya thought of her own father, of all the strangers who'd helped him in his final days. "Just don't wait so long between visits," she said. "Even when he's confused, even when he forgets, some part of him knows when you're here." James nodded, his eyes wet. I know. Walking home in the frosty night, Maya thought about what Mr. Wilson had said about hearts remembering what minds forget. She thought about her father, about Catherine, about all the love that lived on even after loss. Her mom was waiting up when she got home, 2 mugs of hot chocolate on the table. "How is he?" she asked as Maya sat down. "His son's with him now." Maya wrapped her cold hands around the warm mug. "Mom, do you think Dad knew, at the end, how much we loved him?" Her mom reached across the table and took her hand, just like earlier. But this time, when she spoke, her voice was steady. "The heart remembers," she said, "even when the mind forgets." Maya squeezed her mom's hand, letting the tears fall at last. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, covering the world in gentle white. Maya's shoes squeaked on the community center's linoleum floor as she headed to the emergency meeting. The clock on the wall read 7:15 a.m., 4 to 5 minutes before school started. Her stomach churned. Mr. Thompson stood at the front of the activity room, typing on his laptop. A few other volunteers sat scattered around the tables, yawning. Nobody met Maya's eyes as she sat down. "Now that everyone's here," Mr. Thompson said, closing his laptop, "let's discuss last night's incident." He turned to face the room. At approximately 6 p.m. yesterday evening, one of our volunteers took it upon herself to escort a potentially dangerous individual. "Mr. Wilson isn't dangerous," Maya interrupted. "He has Alzheimer's." He was confused, which is exactly why untrained minors shouldn't be involved, Mr. Thompson snapped. "This center's liability insurance doesn't cover. He could have frozen to death." Maya, Mrs. Chen, the volunteer coordinator, touched her arm. "Let him finish." Mr. Thompson straightened his tie. "As I was saying, this incident highlights exactly why the city council should reconsider this center's funding. Unsupervised teenagers running around after dark with vulnerable adults. I wasn't unsupervised. I was walking home from my shift, during which you stayed late without authorization," Mr. Thompson pointed out. Another liability issue. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from James Wilson. "Dad's asking for you. Having a rough morning." Furthermore, Mr. Thompson continued, "I've reviewed your volunteer file. You've been staying late regularly, getting emotionally involved with clients. They're people, not clients." "Maya, please," Mrs. Chen whispered. But Maya couldn't stop. "You don't care about anyone here. You just want to shut us down so you can sell the building to developers." The room went silent. Mr. Thompson's face reddened. "That's it," he said. "Your volunteer privileges are suspended pending review. Hand over your ID badge." Maya's hands shook as she unpinned her badge. 3 years of volunteering, of making a difference, gone in an instant. Her phone buzzed again. "James, he's really agitated. Keeps saying he needs to find you or Catherine." Mrs. Chen took Maya's badge gently. "Go to school, honey. We'll sort this out later." Maya grabbed a backpack and ran out, tears burning her eyes. In the hallway, she nearly collided with someone. "Whoa, careful." A steady hand caught her arm. It was Dr. Martinez, Mrs. Martinez's daughter, who ran the center's medical clinic. "Maya? What's wrong?" Maya told her everything between sobs, finding Mr. Wilson, the suspension, the text from James. Dr. Martinez listened, then checked her watch. "I'm heading to check on Mr. Wilson anyway. Want to ride along? But school, I'll write you a note. Come on." In Dr. Martinez's car, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mom. "Principal called. Where are you?" Maya typed back, with Dr. Martinez. "Mr. Wilson emergency. Call you soon." They pulled up to Mr. Wilson's house just as James stormed out the front door. "I can't do this," he shouted into his phone. "I have meetings. I have deadlines. Yes, I know he's my father." But he spotted them and lowered his voice. Dr. Martinez approached him while Maya hung back. Through the front window, She could see Mr. Wilson pacing in his pajamas. He won't take his medications, James told Dr. Martinez. Won't eat. Won't sit down. Just keeps asking for Catherine or Maya. I'm right here, Maya said. James ran a hand through his hair. I have to get back to work. I can't. I'm not equipped for this. Go, Dr. Martinez said. We'll handle it. Inside, Mr. Wilson's face lit up when he saw Maya. There you are. Catherine's been worried sick. I'm Maya, remember? From last night. His face fell. Maya. Yes. You helped me get home. He gripped her arm. Don't let them take me away. James wants to send me away. Nobody's taking you anywhere, Dr. Martinez said soothingly. Let's sit down and have some breakfast. Maya helped make toast while Dr. Martinez did a quick checkup. Mr. Wilson kept Maya in his sight the whole time. Blood pressure's a bit high, Dr. Martinez murmured. He needs his medication. Maya found the pills in the kitchen, organized in a weekly dispenser. Mr. Wilson, can you take these for me? He studied her face. You look so young. Like Catherine when we first met. Tell me about that, Maya said, holding out the pills and some water. She was a librarian, he said, accepting the pills automatically. Beautiful dark hair. The kindest eyes. He swallowed the medication. I keep thinking she'll come back. I know, Maya said softly. I used to think that about my dad. Dr. Martinez's phone rang. The community center. She stepped into the kitchen to answer it. Mr. Wilson grabbed Maya's hand suddenly. I remember things sometimes. Then I forget again. It's like drowning. Over and over. You're not drowning, Maya said. We won't let you. Dr. Martinez came back, her face grave. Maya, that was Mrs. Chen. Your mom's at the center. You need to go back. Maya looked at Mr. Wilson. But I'll stay with him until the home health aide arrives. Mr. Wilson's grip tightened. Don't go. Please. Maya's eyes burned. I'll come back. I promise. In the car. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then, you know they are probably going to terminate your volunteer position completely. They can't. The center needs volunteers. Mr. Thompson's had it out for the center since he took over as administrator. He's just looking for excuses. Maya's phone buzzed. A text from her mom. Where are you? At the community center. Maya's mom paced the lobby in her hospital scrubs. I got called out of work for this. What were you thinking? Mom, I can explain. Mrs. Johnson. Mr. Thompson appeared in the doorway. Could you and Maya join us? In his office. Mrs. Chen sat with a thick file, Maya's volunteer record. Given Maya's history of boundary issues, Mr. Thompson began. Boundary issues. Maya's mom interrupted. Staying late, getting emotionally involved with clients, and now this incident with Mr. Wilson. You mean saving an old man from freezing to death? Everyone turned to stare at Maya's mom. I understand liability concerns, she continued. But my daughter did exactly what I've taught her to do. Help people who need it. Nevertheless, Mr. Thompson said, we've decided to terminate her volunteer position effective immediately. Maya felt like she'd been punched. You can't. Furthermore, he continued, I'm recommending the city council review the center's entire volunteer program. Because one teenager showed compassion. Maya's mom demanded. Because this center is a liability nightmare waiting to happen. Maya's phone buzzed again. James, Dad's refusing to let the aide in. Keeps asking for you. She stood up. I have to go. Maya, sit down, her mom said. No. Mr. Wilson needs help. Fire me if you want, Mr. Thompson. But you can't stop me from caring about people. She ran out before anyone could stop her. Behind her, she heard her mom say, you know what? She's right. Do what you have to do. But remember, that liability nightmare you're so worried about? She probably saved a man's life last night. Maya was halfway to Mr. Wilson's house when her mom's car pulled up beside her. Get in. Mom, I said get in. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. Maya climbed into the passenger seat. You're not mad. Her mom sighed. I'm terrified. Just like I was terrified every time your father got confused and wandered off. But you're right. We can't stop caring just because it's hard. They pulled up to Mr. Wilson's house as the home health aide was leaving in frustration. He's having a bad day, she told them. Won't let anyone near him. Maya's mom squared her shoulders. Good thing I'm a nurse. Then, inside, they found Mr. Wilson sitting in his chair, clutching a photo of Catherine. Maya, he said. You came back. I promised I would. She sat beside him. This is my mom. She's a nurse. Like Catherine was. He studied Maya's mom. You have kind eyes. Like her. Maya's mom pulled up a chair. Tell me about Catherine, Mr. Wilson. What kind of nurse was she? As Mr. Wilson talked, Maya watched her mom slowly, gently coax him into letting her check his vital signs, take his medication, eat some lunch. You're good at this, Maya said later, as they cleaned up the kitchen. So are you. Her mom hugged her tight. You're so much like your father, seeing people who need help and not walking away. Maya's phone buzzed one last time. Mrs. Chen. Emergency board meeting tomorrow about the center. Mr. Thompson pushing for immediate closure. Maya showed her mom the text. Well, her mom said, I guess we better figure out how to fight back. Through the kitchen door, they could hear Mr. Wilson humming an old love song. The one he said Catherine used to sing while she worked in the garden. Some battles were worth fighting, Maya thought. Some people were worth saving, even if it meant risking everything else. Maya sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by sticky notes and printouts about Alzheimer's care. Her laptop showed a dozen open tabs, medical websites, care forums, memory support groups. The clock on her nightstand read 2:17 a.m. Just a little longer, she muttered, writing another note. Her history test tomorrow seemed distant and unimportant compared to this. Her phone lit up. A text from James Wilson. Dad had a good day. Kept asking when you're coming back. Maya smiled, adding another sticky note to her growing collection. After the disaster at the community center yesterday, she'd spent every free moment researching Alzheimer's care. Her mom had helped, sharing what she knew from her nursing experience. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly shut her laptop. Her door opened. Maya. Her mom stood in the doorway in her pajamas. It's the middle of the night. I know. I just needed to finish this. Maya gestured at her notes. Look what I found. If we put labels on everything in Mr. Wilson's house, with pictures and simple instructions. Honey, her mom sat on the bed. You have a test tomorrow. This is more important. Your education is important too. Her mom picked up one of the sticky notes. What's this? It's a daily schedule. See? We can put photos of Catherine next to each activity to help him stay oriented. And I found these special clocks that show whether it's morning or night. Maya. Her mom's voice was gentle. When was the last time you slept? Maya shrugged. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. I can't stop thinking about him alone in that house. What if he forgets where something is? What if he wanders off again? That's why he has a home health aide, who he won't let in half the time. But he trusts me. Mom. He lets me help. Her mom was quiet for a moment, reading Maya's notes. These are good ideas, she finally said. But you need rest too. Dad never got to rest. The words came out before Maya could stop them. He had to keep fighting, keep trying to remember, until she broke off, wiping her eyes. Her mom slid down to sit beside her on the floor, pulling her close. Your father would be so proud of you. But he'd also want you to take care of yourself. Maya leaned against her mom's shoulder. I just don't want Mr. Wilson to end up in a nursing home. He's scared of being sent away, just like Dad was. I know, baby. Her mom stroked her hair. Get some sleep. We'll work on this together tomorrow after school. But Maya couldn't sleep. As soon as her mom went back to bed, she opened her laptop again. By morning, she had a complete system planned out. She dozed through her history test, probably failing it. But by afternoon, she was at Mr. Wilson's house with her supplies, labels, photos, sticky notes, and a new clock she'd bought with her savings. What's all this? James asked when he answered the door. He looked tired, his tie loose. A system to help Mr. Wilson stay oriented, Maya explained, showing him her notes. See? We'll label everything with pictures and simple instructions. And this clock shows whether it's day or night. Maya. James rubbed his face. I appreciate everything you're doing. But I'm meeting with a nursing home administrator next week. Maya's heart stopped. What? No. Look, this will work. Where's Mr. Wilson? In his chair. But Maya. She pushed past him into the living room. Mr. Wilson sat in his usual spot, looking through photo albums. Mr. Wilson? It's Maya. He looked up, his face brightening. Maya. Catherine said you might come today. Maya swallowed hard. I brought some things to help you around the house. Want to see? For the next hour, she showed him her system. Labels for the bathroom, kitchen cabinets, medication organizer. Photos of Catherine next to his favorite chair, his bed, his morning coffee cup. A daily schedule with clear pictures and instructions. See, this shows it's time for lunch, she explained, pointing to the schedule. And here's Catherine's picture to remind you where she liked to sit. Mr. Wilson touched the photo gently. She always sat here, every morning with her coffee. James watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Maya kept working, explaining each label, each photo. Mr. Wilson followed her around the house, asking questions, sometimes clear and sometimes confused. In the kitchen, she labeled the stove with big red letters. Stop. Ask for help first. I used to cook, Mr. Wilson said suddenly. Made Catherine breakfast every Sunday. French toast with cinnamon. That sounds delicious, Maya said, adding another label to the refrigerator. It was her favorite. His voice cracked. I don't remember the recipe anymore. Maya stopped what she was doing and took his hand. Maybe we can find it together. Look through your recipe books. James cleared his throat from the doorway. Dad? The nursing home administrator wants to meet you on Tuesday. Mr. Wilson's grip on Maya's hand tightened. No. No homes. Catherine wouldn't want. I can't, Dad. We talked about this. You need more care than I can provide. I'm fine here. Maya helps me. And Catherine, Mom's gone. Dad. She's been gone for 3 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Wilson's hand trembled in Maya's. I know that, he said quietly. Sometimes I know that. Maya glared at James. He's doing better. This system will help, Maya. James's voice was tired. You're a teenager. You can't be here all the time. What happens when he forgets to take his medication? Or leaves the stove on? Or wanders off again? That's what the labels are for. And I can check on him every day after school. You have your own life to live. This is part of my life. Maya realized she was shouting. She lowered her voice. Please, just give the system a chance. James looked at his father, who was staring at Catherine's photo on the refrigerator. 1 week, James finally said. We'll try it for 1 week. But if anything goes wrong, it won't, Maya promised. I'll make sure of it. She spent the rest of the afternoon finishing the labels and explaining everything to Mrs. Martinez, who agreed to check on Mr. Wilson during her breaks. Catherine would like this, Mr. Wilson said as Maya packed up her supplies. She was always so organized. Tell me more about her, Maya said, sitting beside him. She loved order, everything in its place. He smiled at the new labels. Like this. She would have done something like this. Maya's phone buzzed, her mom asking where she was. She ignored it. I get confused sometimes, Mr. Wilson continued. But these pictures, they help me remember. That's the idea. Maya showed him the schedule again. See, each part of your day is mapped out. And there are emergency numbers by every phone. James came in from making calls in the kitchen. Maya, your mom just called my cell. She's worried. Maya sighed. I should go. But I'll be back tomorrow to check how the system's working. Promise? Mr. Wilson asked. Promise. Outside, James walked her to the door. Maya, wait. He handed her an envelope. For the clock and supplies. She pushed it back. No. This is something I wanted to do. Why? Why are you doing all this for a stranger? Maya thought of her father, of all the strangers who had helped him at the end. Because someone did it for my dad, she said. And because Mr. Wilson deserves to stay in his home as long as possible. Just give the system a chance. James nodded slowly. 1 week. At home, Maya's mom was waiting in the kitchen. You missed dinner. Again. I know. I'm sorry. But Mom, you should see the system I set up. Mr. Wilson really responded to it. Her mom held up a paper. Your history teacher called. You failed your test. Maya's stomach dropped. I can make it up. Honey. Her mom sat down. I know you want to help, but you can't sacrifice everything else. I'm not. I need to make this work. James is giving the system 1 week before he decides about the nursing home. Her mom was quiet for a moment. 1 week to prove what? That Mr. Wilson can stay in his home. That he doesn't need to be sent away. Like we had to send your father to the hospital. Maya flinched. That was different. Was it? Her mom's eyes were wet. We tried everything too. But sometimes, honey, love isn't enough. Sometimes people need more help than we can give. I can make this work, Maya insisted. I have to. Her mom pulled her into a hug. I know you'll try. Just don't forget to take care of yourself too. That night, Maya lay awake in bed, reviewing the system in her mind. Labels, photos, schedules, emergency contacts. It had to work. It had to be enough. Her phone lit up with a text from James. Dad's following the evening routine perfectly. Keep your fingers crossed. Maya smiled in the darkness. 1 day down. 6 more to prove that sometimes, with enough help, people could stay right where they belonged, at home. The morning sun streamed through Mr. Wilson's kitchen windows as Maya checked his medication organizer. 5 days into the new system, and everything was running smoothly. Mr. Wilson followed the schedule, took his pills, and hadn't tried to wander off once. Coffee's ready, Mr. Wilson called from the counter, where he carefully poured 2 cups. The label Maya had put on the coffee maker read 3 scoops only with a picture of a measuring spoon. Thanks, Maya smiled, watching him follow the morning routine they'd established. He even remembered to put cream in her coffee, something she'd only mentioned once. Catherine liked cream too, he said, sitting across from her at the small kitchen table. Today was a good day. He seemed clear and focused. Maya checked her watch. She had 20 minutes before school started. How did you sleep? Well enough. He tapped the day-night clock on the wall. This helps, knowing what time it is. The front door opened suddenly. James walked in, followed by a woman in a business suit carrying a leather portfolio. Maya's stomach dropped. This wasn't supposed to happen until next week. Dad? James called out. It's me. Ms. Roberts from Sunny Meadows is here too. He stopped when he saw Maya. What are you doing here so early? Morning check-in, Maya said, standing. Part of the system, remember? The woman, Ms. Roberts, stepped forward. Mr. Wilson? I'm Sandra Roberts from Sunny Meadows Assisted Living. Your son asked me to. No. Mr. Wilson gripped his coffee cup. No homes. I told you, James. I'm fine here. Dad, please. Just talk to Ms. Roberts. See what they offer. Maya gathered her backpack. I should get to school. Stay, Mr. Wilson said sharply. Please. Ms. Roberts sat down, opening her portfolio. Mr. Wilson, Sunny Meadows provides round-the-clock care in a safe, comfortable environment. This is my environment, Mr. Wilson interrupted. My home. Catherine's home. Dad. James's voice cracked. Mom would want you to be safe. I am safe. Maya helped me. Look. He pointed to the labels, the schedules, the photos. Everything's organized. I take my pills. I eat my meals. He stopped, confusion clouding his face. What day is it? Thursday, Maya said quietly. Coffee and toast day. Yes, Thursday. Mr. Wilson nodded. See, I remember with the system. Ms. Roberts made a note in her portfolio. The confusion comes and goes, doesn't it? That's why supervision is so important. Here's supervision, Maya said. Mrs. Martinez checks on him. I come by morning and afternoon. The home health aide, a patchwork of untrained volunteers and part-time help. Ms. Roberts raised an eyebrow. That's hardly adequate. Maya felt her face flush. It's working. Mr. Wilson, show her your medication log. He fumbled with a notebook by his pills, dropping it. Papers scattered across the floor. Case in point, Ms. Roberts murmured. Maya helped Mr. Wilson pick up the papers. His hands were shaking. I don't want to go, he whispered. Please don't let them take me. Dad. James knelt beside them. We need to think about what's best for you. What's best is staying home. Maya snapped. Is doing better. The system works. Until it doesn't, James shot back. What happens when he has a bad day? When he forgets who you are? Where he is? Then we help him remember. That's what the photos are for. What the labels. He needs professional care. He needs to be home. Stop. Mr. Wilson's shouts silenced them both. He stood, steadier than Maya had seen him in days. This is my decision. My life. Ms. Roberts cleared her throat. Actually, Mr. Wilson, your son has power of attorney. If he feels residential care is necessary, get out. Mr. Wilson's voice was steel. All of you, except Maya. Dad. I said get out. James and Ms. Roberts exchanged looks. Maya stayed where she was, her heart pounding. We'll continue this discussion later, Ms. Roberts said, gathering her papers. When everyone's calmer. After they left, Mr. Wilson sank into his chair. They think I'm helpless. You're not, Maya said fiercely. You're doing so well with the system. Am I? He looked at her, his eyes clear but sad. Or are you just being kind? Maya sat across from him. Want to know something? My dad had brain cancer. Near the end, he got confused she swallowed hard. Like you do sometimes. But he still knew what he wanted. His choices still mattered. What happened to him? We had to put him in the hospital. He hated it. Kept begging to go home. Maya wiped her eyes. That's why I made this system. So maybe you won't have to leave. Mr. Wilson was quiet for a long moment. James means well, he finally said. He's scared. Like I was scared when Catherine got sick. But you took care of her at home. Yes. He smiled faintly. She made me promise. No hospitals unless absolutely necessary. Maya's phone buzzed. Probably school wondering where she was. She ignored it. Mr. Wilson? Can you tell me honestly, is the system helping? He looked around the kitchen, at all the labels and photos. It helps me remember. Keeps me anchored when things get foggy. Show me. He stood and walked her through his daily routine. Coffee here, 3 scoops. Medication in this box, breakfast foods in this cabinet. Catherine's photo reminds me where things go. And the schedule, morning coffee and toast. Noon sandwich. Evening TV news. He pointed to each item. The pictures help when I can't read so well. Maya checked her watch again. She was definitely late for school now. I have to go, she said reluctantly. Will you be okay? The home health aide comes at 10. Mr. Wilson nodded. I'll follow the schedule. You've given me back some control, Maya. Some dignity. She hugged him impulsively. He smelled like coffee and aftershave, just like her dad used to. I'll be back after school, she promised. We'll show James how well you're doing. Outside, she found James sitting in his car, head in his hands. She tapped on his window. He rolled it down, eyes red. You don't understand, he said before she could speak. The responsibility, the worry, the constant fear that something will happen. I do understand, Maya interrupted. I watched my dad die. Watched him lose himself piece by piece. But he was still a person. His choices still mattered. Dad can't make safe choices anymore. Then we help him make them. The system works. James. His eating. Taking his meds. Staying oriented. For now. But what about when he gets worse? When he needs more care than labels and schedules can provide? Maya took a deep breath. Then we'll deal with it. But right now, he can stay home. He wants to stay home. James was quiet for a long moment. Show me, he finally said. Show me exactly how the system works. For the next hour, Maya walked him through everything, the labels, the photos, the schedules, the emergency protocols. She showed him the medication logs, the daily check-in notes from Mrs. Martinez and the home health aide. And you check on him twice a day? James asked. Morning and afternoon. More if he needs it. Mrs. Martinez lives next door. The home health aide comes daily. And I'm only a 10-minute walk away. You've thought of everything. Maya shrugged. I had to. For him. For me. James rubbed his face. I'm terrified of making the wrong choice. Of failing him like I failed Mom. You didn't fail her. And you're not failing him. Maya touched his arm. Just give him a chance. Give the system a chance. Through the window, they could see Mr. Wilson in his chair, following his morning schedule perfectly. He held one of Catherine's photos, talking to it softly. One more week, James said finally. If this keeps working, maybe we can postpone Sunny Meadows. For now. Maya's phone buzzed again. A text from her mom. School called. Where are you? I have to go face the music, she said. But I'll be back this afternoon. James caught her arm as she turned to leave. Maya? Thank you. For seeing him as a person, not just a problem to solve. She thought of her father again, of all the dignity he'd lost at the end. Everyone deserves to be seen, she said. Everyone deserves a chance to stay home. Walking to school, Maya smiled despite knowing she was in trouble. Sometimes you had to break rules to do what was right. Sometimes love meant fighting for someone else's dignity, someone else's choices. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Wilson. He'd learned to use the phone feature on his system schedule, following the routine. Thank you for giving me back some control. Maya texted back a quick heart emoji, then squared her shoulders and headed for the school office. Whatever punishment was coming, It was worth it. Some battles were worth fighting. Some people were worth any price. Maya sat at Mr. Wilson's kitchen table, sorting through old photos while he made tea. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation with James and Ms. Roberts. The system was working better than anyone had expected. Found another one of you and Catherine, Maya said, holding up a yellowed photograph. Looks like a beach. Mr. Wilson peered at it, setting down their mugs. Cape Cod, 1975. Our 10th anniversary. He smiled. She got terribly sunburned that day. Maya added it to their growing collection. They were making a timeline of photos to help Mr. Wilson track his memories. His good days now outnumbered the bad ones. The front door opened, and James walked in carrying grocery bags. He came by more often now, learning the system, trying to be more involved. Dad? Maya? I brought those cookies you like. The ones with macadamia nuts? Mr. Wilson asked hopefully. Your favorite? James set the bags down. And I talked to Dr. Martinez. She's very impressed with your progress. Maya helped unpack the groceries, putting everything in its labeled place. James had even bought items with the exact brands and pictures she'd used on the labels. Show him the new photos we found, Maya suggested. Mr. Wilson proudly displayed their timeline. See, Catherine and me through the years. Maya's helping me write down the stories so I don't forget. James examined the photos, his throat working. I remember this one. My first fishing trip. You caught a trout bigger than your arm, Mr. Wilson said. Catherine was so worried you'd fall in. But you kept me safe. James touched the photo gently. You always did. The doorbell rang. Maya answered it to find her mom in her nursing scrubs, just off her shift. Thought I'd stop by, she said. See how everyone's doing. Mr. Wilson brightened. Sarah, come see our timeline. Maya smiled. He'd started remembering people's names more consistently. Her mom, Sarah, had become a regular visitor, sharing nursing tips and stories about Catherine with Mr. Wilson. These are wonderful, her mom said, examining the photos. Oh, is this Catherine in her nursing uniform? County General, 1968, Mr. Wilson said proudly. She ran the pediatric ward. James watched them from the kitchen doorway. I can't believe how much he remembers now. The photos help, Maya explained. And having a routine, familiar faces, people to talk to about Catherine. A car pulled up outside. Through the window, Maya spotted Mr. Thompson getting out, his ever-present portfolio under his arm. What's he doing here? She muttered. But Mr. Thompson didn't look angry today. If anything, he seemed uncomfortable as he rang the doorbell. James answered it. Can we help you? Actually, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. I came to apologize. And to discuss the community center. Maya's heart jumped. What about it? May I come in? They gathered in the living room. Maya, her mom, James, Mr. Wilson, and Mr. Thompson. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching the dust motes in its beam. The city council reviewed my recommendation to close the center. Mr. Thompson began. But they also reviewed letters from the community, including a very compelling one from James about the importance of volunteer programs. Maya looked at James in surprise. He shrugged. I told them how much you've helped Dad. How the center's programs make a real difference. Mr. Thompson nodded. The council agreed. They've not only decided to keep the center open, but to increase funding for volunteer training in elder care. Maya could hardly believe what she was hearing. Really? Really? Mr. Thompson turned to her. And we'd like you to help develop the training program. Your system for Mr. Wilson is exactly the kind of practical support we need to provide. I don't know what to say. Say yes, her mom urged. You've earned this. Mr. Wilson reached for Maya's hand. You helped me stay in my home. Maybe you can help others too. Maya squeezed his fingers. I'd like that. Excellent. Mr. Thompson stood. We'll set up a meeting next week to discuss details. And Maya, I was wrong about you. I'm sorry. After he left, they celebrated with James's cookies and more tea. Mr. Wilson told stories about Catherine, clearer and more detailed than ever. We should have a dinner, Maya's mom suggested. Everyone together. Make it a regular thing. Sunday dinners, Mr. Wilson said. Catherine always did Sunday dinners. Perfect. James checked his calendar. I can drive up every weekend. Maya watched them planning, her heart full. This was what she'd fought for, not just keeping Mr. Wilson home, but bringing people together, building connections. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Martinez. "Peek outside." Maya went to the window. A small group had gathered on the sidewalk. Mrs. Martinez, Dr. Martinez, some of the community center volunteers. They carried casseroles, flowers, cards. "What's going on?" James asked, joining her. I think they are here for dinner." Mr. Wilson came to look. Catherine would love this. She always said a full house was a happy house. They invited everyone in. The house filled with voices, laughter, the smell of home-cooked food. Maya helped Mr. Wilson greet each person, gently reminding him of names when needed. "You've created something special here," her mom said quietly, watching Mr. Wilson show his photo timeline to the guests. "Not just the system, but community." "We all did," Maya corrected. "Everyone helped." Dr. Martinez raised her glass of iced tea. To Maya, who showed us that sometimes the best medicine is simply caring enough to try. To Maya, everyone echoed. Maya blushed. To all of us. And to Catherine, who taught Mr. Wilson about love and memory. Mr. Wilson's eyes grew misty. "She would have loved you, Maya. All of you." The evening stretched on, warm and golden. People shared stories, passed dishes, admired photos. Mr. Wilson stayed clear and present, basking in the attention. Later, as guests began to leave, James pulled Maya aside. "I've officially canceled the nursing home application," he said. "As long as we can keep this support system going." "We will," Maya promised. "All of us together." Her mom overheard and hugged her. "I'm so proud of you, honey. Your father would be too." Maya looked around the living room, at the photos, the labels, the people who'd become a kind of family. "I think Dad would understand. About fighting to stay home, to keep your dignity." "He would," her mom agreed. "And he'd love seeing you help others the way you wished someone could have helped him." Mr. Wilson called Maya over to help him with the evening medication routine. His hands were steady as he followed the system they'd created together. "Thank you," he said softly. "For everything." Maya smiled. "That's what family does." Because that's what they'd become. A family of choice, bound together by love and memory and the simple act of caring enough to try. Outside, the sun set in a blaze of color. Inside, Mr. Wilson's house glowed with warmth and life. The photos of Catherine seemed to smile down at them all, blessing this new chapter in her beloved home. Maya's phone buzzed with a final text from Mrs. Martinez. "See what love can build." Looking around at their gathered community, Maya knew the answer. Love could build bridges between past and present, between confusion and clarity, between strangers who became family. Love could build a home that was more than just walls and labels, a home that lived in hearts and memories, in shared stories and Sunday dinners, in the simple dignity of being seen and valued and never left alone. Mr. Wilson caught her eye and winked, clear and present in this moment of joy. Some battles were worth fighting, Maya thought. Some victories were measured not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of connection, in photographs and cookies and the warm light of belonging. Maya walked into Mr. Wilson's house on a crisp Saturday morning, carrying a box of new supplies for their system. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air. "Maya," Mr. Wilson called from the kitchen. Just in time for breakfast. She found him at the stove, carefully following the instructions she'd labeled on each knob. A plate of perfectly cooked bacon sat on the counter. "You did this yourself?" she asked, impressed. Following the system. He pointed to the laminated morning routine card. "Saturday is bacon and eggs day." James emerged from the guest room, hair rumpled. He'd started staying weekends, another piece of their growing support network. "He hasn't missed a beat all morning," James said. "Even reminded me it was time for his medication." Mr. Wilson beamed. "The clock told me." And Catherine's picture by the pillbox. Maya set out plates while Mr. Wilson served breakfast. His hands were steady, his movements confident. These clear days were becoming more common. "I got an A on my makeup history test," Maya said, sitting down. "Of course you did." Mr. Wilson patted her hand. "Smart. Like Catherine. The school counselor helped me work out a better schedule," she explained to James. "So I can keep helping here without falling behind." James nodded. Dad's not the only one with a good system now. They ate together, sharing plans for the day. Maya had her first volunteer training session at the community center later. James was going to help Mr. Wilson sort through more photos. "Oh, that reminds me." Mr. Wilson went to his desk and returned with an envelope. I found these yesterday, from when Catherine was a student nurse. The photos showed a young Catherine in her crisp uniform, dark hair pulled back, smile radiant. Mr. Wilson handled them carefully, telling stories about each one. She was so nervous her first day, he said, but she knew it was her calling. Helping people, giving them dignity. Like Maya, James said quietly. Maya blushed. I just followed Catherine's example. Speaking of which, she pulled a folder from her backpack. The community center approved my proposal for an elder care volunteer program. Based on our system here. Tell me more, Mr. Wilson said, fully engaged. Maya explained how they train volunteers to create personalized support systems for elderly residents who wanted to stay in their homes. Labels, schedules, photo timelines, all adapted to each person's needs. We're calling it the Catherine Wilson Program, she said. If that's okay. Mr. Wilson's eyes filled with tears. She would be honored, helping others stay home, keep their independence. It's what she did for you, James said. And what Maya did. A knock at the door interrupted them. Maya opened it to find Mr. Thompson with Dr. Martinez. Sorry to interrupt breakfast, Dr. Martinez said, but we wanted to show you something. She handed Maya a newspaper. The headline read, Local Teens Elder Care Program Gains City Support. The council was impressed with your proposal, Mr. Thompson said. They've approved funding for a pilot program at 10 homes. Mr. Wilson read the article over Maya's shoulder. They mentioned Catherine. The program's named for her, Dr. Martinez explained. A nurse who believed in dignity and home care. Perfect inspiration. Maya's phone buzzed, her mom reminding her about the training session. But there was more news too. Got approved for the evening shift. Can help more with Mr. Wilson now. Everything was falling into place. The support network growing stronger every day. We should celebrate, James said. Big dinner tonight? I'll cook. You'll burn the house down, Mr. Wilson teased. His sense of humor had returned with his improving memory. Let's have everyone over. Like a real family. Maya smiled at the word family. Because that's what they'd become, bound by love and purpose and the simple act of caring. Later, as Maya gathered her things for the training session, Mr. Wilson stopped her. I wanted to show you something. He led her to the wall where they'd hung the photo timeline. Look, a new section had been added. Recent photos of their makeshift family. Maya helping with medications. James cooking dinner. Her mom sharing nursing stories. The community center volunteers bringing food and friendship. You did this yourself? Maya asked. Clear day today. Mr. Wilson touched one of the photos. I wanted to remember. The way Catherine helped me remember her. Maya hugged him tight. You're doing so well. Because of you. Because you saw me as a person, not a problem. He stepped back, eyes clear and bright. Go teach others to do the same. At the community center, Maya found a room full of eager volunteers. Mr. Thompson had even come to show support. The Catherine Wilson Program, he announced, will revolutionize how we care for our elderly neighbors. And it started because one teenager refused to walk away. Maya shared their story, finding Mr. Wilson that cold night, creating the system, building a community of support. She showed them photos, labels, schedules. But the most important thing, she said, is seeing the person. Their dignity. Their right to stay home if possible. A volunteer raised her hand. Like what you did for your father. Maya paused. I couldn't keep my dad home at the end. But his experience taught me to fight for others who might have a chance. The training went well. People asked questions, shared ideas, volunteered to help expand the program. Maya's phone buzzed throughout the session. Pictures from James of Mr. Wilson having a great day, remembering stories, following his routine perfectly. One text made her tear up. Dad said Catherine would be proud of you. He's right. After training, Maya walked home through the golden afternoon. She thought about that first night, finding Mr. Wilson confused and cold. How far they'd come since then. Her mom was waiting at home. How'd it go? Really good? Maya showed her the training materials. 10 families to start. Maybe more if it works. When it works, her mom corrected. You've already proved it can. They headed to Mr. Wilson's for the celebration dinner. The house glowed with warmth and light, voices spilling from open windows. Inside, they found a full house. James cooking, with supervision. Mrs. Martinez bringing dessert. Dr. Martinez sharing medical updates. Mr. Thompson actually smiling. And Mr. Wilson in his element, clear and present, telling stories about Catherine to anyone who would listen. Maya. He hugged her. Just in time. James only burned the first batch of garlic bread. Hey! James protested. I'm learning. They all laughed. Maya looked around at their gathered family, not bound by blood but by something just as strong. Catherine would love this, Mr. Wilson said softly. The house full of life again. Maya squeezed his hand. She knows. Somewhere, she knows. The evening wrapped them in warmth and belonging. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families to help, new systems to create. But tonight was for celebrating how far they'd come. How love could build bridges. How fighting for dignity could change not just one life, but many. Mr. Wilson raised his glass. To Catherine, he said clearly, who taught me about love and memory. And to Maya, James added, who taught us all about family. Maya looked around at the faces she'd grown to love. Sometimes the biggest victories came in smallest moments. A remembered name, a shared meal, a house full of light and laughter. And somewhere, she thought, her father and Catherine were smiling down on this family they'd helped create. Born of loss but built on love, stronger together than apart. 1 year later, Maya stood in Mr. Wilson's garden, dirt under her fingernails, sweat on her forehead. The rose bushes Catherine had loved so much were blooming again after months of careful tending. They're beautiful, Mr. Wilson said from his chair on the porch. Just like she used to grow. Red ones were her favorite, right? Maya asked, though she knew the answer. It was their morning routine, sharing memories, keeping them alive. Red as sunset. He smiled. She'd be out here at dawn, talking to them like they could answer back. Maya wiped her hands on her jeans and joined him on the porch. The morning air was cool, fresh with spring promise. Inside, she could hear James making breakfast. He'd gotten much better at cooking over the past year. Big day today, Mr. Wilson said, checking the schedule posted by the door. Community Center ceremony. The 20th family joining the Catherine Wilson program. Maya beamed. And you're giving the opening speech. He nodded, patting the note cards in his pocket. On his good days now, which were many, he could speak clearly about the program that bore his wife's name. About the importance of dignity, of staying home, of building communities of care. The screen door creaked open. James emerged with coffee and toast, Saturday's breakfast, right on schedule. Speech ready, Dad? Ready as I'll be. Mr. Wilson took a careful sip of coffee. Though I might need Maya's help remembering parts. That's what the cards are for, she reminded him. And we're all there to support you. They'd come so far from that cold night when Maya had found him wandering. The system they created together had grown, evolved, strengthened. Now 20 families would benefit from similar support networks. Maya's phone buzzed, her mom confirming she'd meet them at the ceremony. She worked fewer night shifts now, making more time for their extended family. Mail's here, James called, returning from the front walk with a stack of envelopes. Maya, something from the college board. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the letter. She'd applied for a scholarship in geriatric care, inspired by her work with Mr. Wilson. I got it, she squealed. Full ride. Mr. Wilson hugged her tight. Catherine would be so proud. Another nurse in the family. Family. The word felt right. They'd built something special here, not replacing what was lost, but creating something new from the pieces. We should head over soon, James said, checking his watch. The ceremony starts at 11. They had the morning routine down to a science now. Mr. Wilson took his medications, marked them off in the log, changed into the suit they'd laid out the night before, reviewed his speech cards one more time. Maya gathered her things, making sure the house was set for their return later. Labels still marked everything clearly, photos still guided the way, but Mr. Wilson needed them less now. The system had done its job, keeping him home, keeping him whole. The community center buzzed with excitement when they arrived. 20 families gathered to join the program, each with their own story, their own need to stay home. Mr. Thompson greeted them at the door. Our guests of honor. Mr. Wilson, are you ready? Ready. He patted his speech cards again. Maya helped me practice. Inside, Maya found her mom helping set up refreshments. They hugged tight. Proud of you, baby. Her mom whispered. Your father would be too. I know. Maya looked around at the gathered families. I think he led me to Mr. Wilson that night. Him and Catherine both. The ceremony began. Dr. Martinez spoke about the program's success, about dignity and independence. Mr. Thompson shared statistics about elderly care and community support. Then it was Mr. Wilson's turn. He walked to the podium steadily, Maya and James flanking him. The note cards trembled slightly in his hands. A year ago, he began, I was lost, not just physically, but in my mind, in my heart. I'd lost my Catherine, was losing my memories, nearly lost my home. His voice grew stronger. But then an angel found me. A young girl who saw not just an old man with Alzheimer's, but a person who deserved dignity, who deserved to stay home. Maya blinked back tears as he continued. The system she created, the labels, the photos, the schedules, they gave me back my independence. But more than that, she gave me family, community, hope. He gestured to the gathered families. That's what this program offers you. Not just practical help, but connection, understanding, the chance to stay where memories live, where love remains. His voice caught. My Catherine was a nurse. She believed in helping people maintain their dignity, their independence. This program, bearing her name, continues her work. And I'm proud to welcome 20 new families to our community of care. The applause was thunderous. Maya hugged Mr. Wilson as he returned to his seat. Perfect, she whispered. Just perfect. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of introductions, explanations, connections being forged. Each family would get a customized system, volunteers trained in the methods Maya had developed. Full circle, her mom said, watching Maya explain the photo timeline concept to a new family. From one person to many. Later, back at Mr. Wilson's house, they had their regular Sunday dinner. The house filled with now familiar faces. Mrs. Martinez bringing dessert, Dr. Martinez sharing stories, Mr. Thompson discussing program expansion. Maya looked around at their gathered family. At Mr. Wilson, clear-eyed and happy in his own home. At James, finally at peace with his choices. At her mom, beaming with pride. They'd built something beautiful here, something that would last, would grow, would help others find their way home. Penny, for your thoughts? Mr. Wilson asked, joining her by the window. Just grateful, she said, for that cold night, for taking a chance, for everything that came after. He nodded. Catherine used to say everything happens for a reason. Meeting you, that was my reason to keep going, to stay home, to find purpose again. And helping you was my way of healing, Maya admitted. After Dad, they are proud of us, Mr. Wilson said softly. Catherine and your father both. They led us to each other. Maya squeezed his hand. Outside, Catherine's roses bloomed red against the twilight. Inside, their family shared love and laughter and belonging. Time for dessert. James called. Dad's favorite, apple pie. They gathered around the table. This family built on chance and choice and love. Maya looked at the photos on the walls, Catherine's timeline flowing into their own new memories. Mr. Wilson raised his glass. To family, he said clearly. Old and new. To home, Maya added. And staying there. To love, her mom said. Which builds the strongest bridges. They clinked glasses, shared pie, told stories. The house wrapped them in warmth and memory and hope. Later, helping clean up, Maya found Mr. Wilson arranging Catherine's photos for the night, his evening routine. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For seeing me. For fighting for me. For building this family. Maya hugged him tight. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the biggest love stories aren't about romance. They are about family, dignity, and the courage to stay home. Outside, the roses nodded in the evening breeze. Inside, their families' voices filled the rooms with life and love. Some stories end where they began, with a house, a memory, and the simple courage to care. Some families are born of chance encounters on cold nights. Some loves build bridges strong enough to hold not just two hearts, but many. And sometimes, Maya thought, watching Mr. Wilson tell stories to their gathered family, the best way home is through each other's hearts.